Well, here we go, guys. This one is going to be interesting as we really look into the prequel and everything that we need to know about it. As for years, fans of Star Trek Enterprise have talked about what the show could have been. When it aired in the early 2000s, Enterprise had all the ingredients to be something fresh and exciting. A pre-Federation setting, the early days of Starfleet, humanity's first steps into deep space, all ripe territory for storytelling. But instead of a gritty origin story, audiences got something a bit more familiar. A traditional Trek format, with episodes that felt like they belonged to any other series in the franchise. While Enterprise wasn't without its highlights, many viewers felt the show never fully delivered on its potential. Now, over 2 decades later, a new Star Trek film might finally do just that. Here's everything we know about the Star Trek prequel movie. This is gonna be good. So Star Trek's new prequel movie might finally bring Enterprise's original vision to life, really, for us. Directed by Andor's Toby Haynes and written by Seth Grahame-Smith, an upcoming untitled Star Trek prequel film was gearing up for production in the fall of 2024. Paramount Pictures is aiming for a release sometime in 2025 or 2026, and based on early reports, this movie is taking a bold new direction. It's set mainly on Earth and centers around humanity's early encounters with alien life, eventually leading to the founding of the United Federation of Planets. Now that's right, the very foundation of what Star Trek is all about. Amazing. Although the exact timeline of the movie hasn't been confirmed yet, all signs point to it taking place shortly after the events of Star Trek Enterprise. Now, if that's the case, this could be the perfect opportunity to tap into the raw, unpolished early days of Starfleet. Days filled with fear, wonder, and a sense of barely controlled chaos. It's a moment in the Star Trek universe that's always been hinted at but never fully explored on screen. And what makes this even more exciting is how closely this upcoming film seems to mirror the original concept of Enterprise, the one that never made it to air. When Star Trek Enterprise was first pitched by producers Rick Berman and Brannon Braga, it was envisaged as something very different. According to Braga, or Braga, depending how you want to say it, the first season was supposed to be set entirely on Earth. It wasn't about space battles or alien diplomacy. Not just yet, anyway. It was about building the very first starship. The idea was to focus on the behind-the-scenes work, the political drama, the cultural tension with Vulcans, the push and pull of early spacefaring ambition. The show would have followed Captain Jonathan Archer as he assembled his crew, not for a mission of the week adventure, but for a momentous history-making journey into the unknown. The NX-01 Enterprise wouldn't even launch until late in the season, or perhaps not until season 2. Now, that original premise had grit, it had realism, it was going to show the emotional and physical weight of space exploration, not just the sleek optimism we usually see in Star Trek. One of the more compelling elements was the idea that after finally making it into space and facing off against early adversaries like the Klingons, the crew would come limping back to Earth. The ship would be damaged, the crew shaken, the mission a near disaster. And that was the point. Space is terrifying, and the people pushing into it were pioneers, not polished explorers as we've seen. Unfortunately, the network wanted something more familiar, so Enterprise became a traditional Trek show, and that raw foundational story was basically shelved. Now, all these years later, Toby Haynes' upcoming prequel film might actually bring that concept back to life. If the movie is truly about Earth's early relationships with aliens and the formation of the Federation, then we're talking about a Starfleet that's still figuring itself out. Technology won't be as advanced, and protocols for dealing with alien species won't be established yet. It's the perfect recipe for tension, discovery, and yes, plenty of failure. This could be a more grounded, more human Star Trek, one that shows us how the ideals of the Federation were forged in the first place. Sounds fascinating to me. And if this sounds to you like a stretch, think again. Star Trek movies have a long history of recycling and repurposing old ideas. Take Star Trek 2009 by J.J. Abrams, for example. That film rebooted the franchise with a younger cast and a fresh timeline, but its origins actually date back to an abandoned idea from the 1980s. After the disappointing reception of Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, producer Harve Bennett pitched a reboot movie called The Academy Years, which would show how the original Enterprise crew met at Starfleet Academy. Paramount passed at the time, opting instead to make Star Trek VI with the original cast. But decades later, Abrams essentially resurrected that concept, modernized it, and turned it into a box office hit. So is it really that surprising that a long-forgotten concept from Enterprise might finally get its day in the sun? Not at all. In fact, it seems like perfect timing. With modern cinematic techniques, a grounded Earth-based Star Trek origin story could feel fresh harsh and emotionally resonant in a way that we've never seen from the franchise before. In many ways, this movie has the chance to do what Enterprise couldn't. It can bring us closer to the heart of Star Trek, not the polished ships of the utopian future, but the messy, conflicted, and courageous beginning. And for fans who've always wondered what Enterprise was supposed to be, this might be the closest we ever get to seeing that story told the way it was meant to be. So, could Star Trek Enterprise have succeeded with its original vision? That's a pretty good question, and it's the question that's haunted Star Trek fans for over 2 decades. Would Star Trek Enterprise have been a better show if Rick Berman and Brannon Braga had been allowed to follow through on their original idea? Well, back in 2001, the creative duo behind Enterprise knew the franchise was beginning to show signs of wear. After hundreds of episodes cut from the same cloth as the Next Generation, they saw the need for something fresh. Their plan for Enterprise was bold. It would take its time introducing familiar Star Trek elements and instead focus on the raw and risky nature of early space exploration. Now, their goal was to show just how dangerous and uncertain those first steps into the stars really were. And for a moment, you know what? It seemed like they might even pull it off. In the version that aired, there were traces of that original version. The NX-01 Enterprise lacked the polished tech of future starships. No tractor beams, just grapplers. The crew wore jumpsuits instead of crisp uniforms. There was more friction with the Vulcans, and a sense that everything was just a little bit harder than what we'd seen before. But you know what? Network pressures forced Berman and Braga to fall back on a more traditional format. And instead of a gritty origin story, audiences got something familiar and safe. It wasn't bad, it just wasn't groundbreaking. That said, Enterprise did start to find its voice later on. The 3rd season introduced the intense serialized Xindi arc, and season 4 leaned hard into prequel territory with deeper ties to established canon. Many fans argue that season 4 was the show finally becoming what it was always meant to be, but by then it was too late. The series was cancelled in 2005 after just 4 seasons. Now, with Toby Haynes' upcoming Star Trek prequel film on the horizon, there's a real chance that the original spirit of Enterprise might be reborn, and from what little we know, the film will feature a new cast and a new starship, and it's focused on Earth during the formative years of humanity's contact with alien life. Now, that alone echoes so much of what Berman and Braga once pitched. It's not about familiar faces or established icons. It's about building something from the ground up, and that's the thing that could make it special. Of course, not everyone's thrilled about the idea, are they? Some longtime fans are understandably cautious. There's always the worry that a new film could rewrite or contradict canon, or that it won't connect emotionally with the characters we've grown attached to over the years. And let's face it, bringing in a brand new crew instead of revisiting the beloved Enterprise is a big gamble. But you know what? If Haynes' movie really does lean into the raw, unfiltered energy of Starfleet's earliest days, it could be a game changer. Not only would it bring new energy to the franchise, it could also serve as a kind of spiritual redemption for what Enterprise never got to fully become. This film could give fans the origin story that Enterprise was originally meant to deliver. So let's have a look at how does Star Trek's prequel movie connect to the J.J. Abrams Star Trek? Well, when it comes to fitting this movie into the larger Star Trek timeline, it actually connects in some interesting ways to J.J. Abrams' reboot films. Toby Haynes' film is said to take place decades before the events of Abrams' Star Trek in 2009, which kicked off when the Romulan Nero travelled back to 2233 and created the alternate Kelvin timeline. That puts the new prequel squarely in the 22nd century, likely before or during the era of Star Trek Enterprise. But here's the key difference. Haynes' movie will be set in the prime timeline, the original continuity, before Nero's arrival splintered reality. So while Abrams' films rewrote Star Trek history from the moment of Nero's attack, Haynes' movie will explore the untouched past that leads to everything we know. In many ways, it could serve as the true origin of the entire Star Trek universe. Meanwhile, Star Trek IV, yes, it's still in development, is said to be the final outing for Chris Pine's crew. Written by Steve Yockey, this sequel could continue the Kelvin timeline saga, taking place long after the events of Haynes' original story. It'll bring closure to the reboot films, while the new prequel steps even further back to lay the foundation for it. It's really a fascinating dynamic. You know, on one hand, you have a movie that closes the book on a modern chapter of Star Trek, and of course on the other, you have a film that rewinds the clock to where it all began, possibly channeling a long-lost idea that fans never got to see. I think that if done right, this prequel could be more than just another entry in the franchise. It could could be a fresh start and a long-awaited payoff for a vision that's been waiting in the wings for 25 years. And there you have it. That's everything we know about the prequel so far. So why don't you leave a comment and subscribe down below and basically get involved in everything that we say. And I look forward to seeing you guys next time. Take care. Bye.